My father texted before dawn saying no deadbeats at Christmas. Only my sister and her family. No greeting, just a verdict. I realized they were not protecting the holiday from me, but protecting their lie from being seen. So I did not argue. I booked the one place they could never control and invited everyone they claimed belonged to them. By the time he understood whose house the family was celebrating in, it was too late to rewrite the story. My name is Isla Green, and the notification light on my phone blinked once, cutting through the darkness of my bedroom like a sniper's laser sight. It was 4:32 in the morning. The sky outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of my mountain lodge was still an impenetrable charcoal gray, holding the heavy silence of a coming snowstorm. I did not need to check the caller ID to know who sends a message at that hour. It is a specific kind of power move, designed to catch you before your defenses are up, before the coffee hits your bloodstream, before you can remember that you are a grown woman running a high-stakes security firm and not a frightened child waiting for permission to speak. I picked up the phone. The screen brightness stung my eyes, but the words stung worse. It was from Frank Green, my father. The message was short. It lacked punctuation at the end, which somehow made it feel more final, like a judge banging a gavel in a courtroom where I was not allowed to have a lawyer. No deadbeats at Christmas, only your sister and her family. I stared at the glowing letters. There was no greeting, no question, no Merry Christmas or how are you doing. There was just the verdict. He had not even bothered to type my name. I was simply the negative space in the sentence, the thing that had to be removed so the picture could be perfect. For a long time, I just sat there in the dark. The sheets were high thread count Egyptian cotton, cool against my skin. The heating system hummed almost imperceptibly, maintaining a precise 68 degrees. I had built a life of absolute precision, of systems that worked, of code that did not break. Yet here was this text message, a clumsy, brutal line of code from a man who still used his index finger to type, and it threatened to crash my entire operating system. Deadbeat. That was the word that stuck. It hooked into my ribs and twisted. I knew why he used it. It was a reference to a single moment in time. Years ago. A moment of weakness I had promised myself never to repeat. But in the Green family archivist's office, the records of my failures were laminated and hung on the wall, while the records of my successes were shredded before they even hit the bin. To Frank Green, I was not the CEO of Sable Root Security. I was not the woman who had just negotiated an 8-figure contract with a defense contractor. I was the daughter who did not fit the mold. I was the glitch. My thumb hovered over the keypad. The old Ela, the one from 5 years ago, would have typed a paragraph. She would have apologized. She would have begged. She would have offered to sleep on the floor, to cook the dinner, to stay out of the photos if that was what it took. She would have asked what she had done wrong this time, even though the answer was always the same. She existed in a way that did not flatter them. But the Isla sitting in this lodge was different. I had been forged in the fire of their rejection. I typed 2 words. Understood. Okay. I hit send. I did not add an emoji. I did not add love you. I matched his energy. Cold. Transactional. Final. I set the phone down on the nightstand and swung my legs out of bed. The floorboards were reclaimed oak, solid and expensive. I walked out of the bedroom and down the long, floating staircase into the main living area. The lodge was vast. It was a masterpiece of modern architecture hidden deep in the Rockies, a place of glass and steel and stone that I had bought 6 months ago. Nobody in my family knew it existed, to them. I was likely still living in that cramped apartment in the city, counting pennies, struggling to keep my head above water. They preferred that version of me. It made them feel generous when they decided not to help. I walked to the kitchen island, a slab of black granite that cost more than my father's first 3 cars combined. I started the espresso machine. As the grinder whirred, shattering the silence, I looked out at the driveway. The snow was starting to fall. Big, fat flakes drifting down in the floodlights. On the counter, next to a bowl of untouched fruit, lay a thick stack of documents. They were the closing papers for this property, along with the technical schematics for the perimeter security. I had designed the security myself. It was military grade. Biometric sensors at the main gate, license plate recognition, thermal cameras along the fence line. I had built this place to keep threats out. But as I sipped the bitter, hot espresso, I realized I had been looking at it wrong. A fortress is not just for keeping people out, it is for controlling who comes in. I picked up the schematic map. My finger traced the winding road that led up the mountain, the only access point to the property. It was a 3-mile choke point. If you controlled the gate at the bottom, you controlled the reality at the top. My father's text message replayed in my mind. No deadbeats, only your sister and her family. He wanted a Christmas with successful people. He wanted a Christmas with his people. He wanted a stage where he could play the patriarch, where my sister Tessa could play the golden child, and where her husband Miles could play the rising star. They wanted a tableau of perfection. I could give them that. I could give them exactly what they asked for, and it would be the worst thing that ever happened to them. I put the coffee cup down. My hand was steady. My heart rate, which had spiked when the text first arrived, had slowed to a rhythmic, predatory thump. I picked up my phone again. I did not call my father. I did not call my mother. Diane, who I knew was likely sitting next to him, nodding in agreement as he sent that text. Perhaps even suggesting the wording. I certainly did not call Tessa. I scrolled past their names. I scrolled until I found a contact simply listed as Uncle Wade. Wade was my mother's younger brother. He was the black sheep before I took the title. He was the one who sat in the corner at family gatherings, watching the performance with a cynical half-smile, nursing a single whiskey while the rest of them got drunk on their own self-importance. He was the only one who had ever looked me in the eye and asked me what I was building. Rather than asking why I wasn't married yet, I pressed the call button. It rang 4 times. I checked the time again. 5:15 in the morning. He would be up. Wade was an insomniac who read historical biographies until dawn. Isla? His voice was rough with sleep and tobacco, but alert. Everything okay? It is early. I am fine. Wade, I said. My voice sounded strange in the large, empty room. It sounded like the voice of a stranger. I need you to do something for me. Name it, he said. No hesitation. No, let me check my calendar. Just the loyalty of the disregarded. I need you to reach out to the family, I said. Not Frank and Diane, not Tessa, everyone else, Aunt Sarah, the cousins from Jersey, the Davises down the street who used to let me hide in their library, the people who actually matter. Wade was silent for a moment. I could hear the flick of a lighter on his end. Reach out to them for what, kid? I took a breath. I looked at the security monitors on the wall, the grid of cameras showing the empty, snow-dusted road leading to my gate. Tell them Christmas is at my place this year, I said. Tell them I am hosting. Tell them to bring everyone, the kids, the dogs, the partners my parents pretend don't exist, everyone. Your place? Wade asked. You mean the apartment? No, I said. Not the apartment. I will send you the address. It is a lodge about 2 hours north of the city. There's plenty of room. I have 18 bedrooms. I have a chef coming in. I have everything covered. The silence on the other end stretched out. I could practically hear Wade processing the data. 18 bedrooms, a chef, a lodge north of the city. He was doing the math that my parents had refused to do. He was realizing that the narrative of Isla the failure was a fabrication. Isla, he said, his voice dropping an octave. Does Frank know about this? Frank sent me a text this morning, I said. He told me not to come home. He said no deadbeats allowed. Wade let out a low whistle. It was a sound of sharp, angry air. That son of a bitch. He wants a perfect Christmas, I said. I am going to give him one, but I'm going to host it. And when the rest of the family realizes that the deadbeat daughter is the one hosting the celebration of the decade, Frank and Diane are going to have a choice. They can stay home alone in their pride, or they can come to my house and play by my rules. This is dangerous, Isla, Wade said. He wasn't trying to stop me. He was analyzing the threat level, just like I would. You are flipping the board. They will hate you for it. They already hate me, Wade, I said. They hate me because I am inconvenient. Now, I am going to be undeniable. Are you sure? He asked. It was the only question that mattered. Once you send these invites, there is no going back. You are declaring war on the family hierarchy. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the window. I saw a woman with tired eyes but a set jaw. I saw the girl who used to build robots in the garage while her sister practiced cheerleading routines. I saw the woman who had built a company from a laptop on a cardboard box. I have been sure for years, I said. I just needed the right venue. All right, Wade said. I could hear the smile in his voice now. It was a grim, satisfied smile. Send me the address. I will make the calls. I will tell them it is a reunion. I will tell them it is time we all got together without the usual management. Thank you. Wade. Isla, he added. Just before hanging up, make it spectacular. I intend to, I said. I ended the call. The sun was beginning to crest over the peaks now, turning the gray sky into a bruised purple. The light hit the snow on the driveway, making it sparkle like diamond dust. I walked over to the security panel on the wall. The screen showed the main gate. It was a heavy iron structure, reinforced to withstand the impact of a truck. Currently, it was locked. I tapped the screen and pulled up the access log. I added a new group permission, guests. Then I opened my messages again. I looked at Frank's text one last time. No deadbeats. He used the word like a weapon, a blunt instrument to keep me in my place, to remind me that without his approval, I was insolvent. He thought money was the only way to keep score. He thought success was a finite resource that he held the keys to. He had no idea that I had changed the currency. I set the phone down on the cold granite. Deadbeats? I whispered to the empty, beautiful room. Okay, Dad, let's define the word. I looked at the gate on the monitor. Let's define it in front of the whole family. The snow fell harder, covering the tracks of everything that had come before, preparing the ground for what was about to happen. I turned away from the window and walked toward my office. There was work to do. I had a party to plan. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for an invitation. I was the one writing the list. The silence in the lodge was heavy, but it was not nearly as heavy as the silence I grew up in. People think silence is just the absence of noise. But in the Green household, silence was a weapon. It was a texture. It was a thick, suffocating blanket that you had to learn to breathe through. As I stood in my kitchen, waiting for the sun to fully rise, my mind did not stay on the security schematics or the guest list I had just authorized. Instead, it drifted backward, pulled by the gravity of that single word my father had texted me, deadbeat. It is funny how a word can act like a key, unlocking a library of memories you thought you had burned down years ago. I was 13 years old the first time I realized that my existence was an inconvenience to their narrative. I had spent 3 months in the garage, a cold, oil-stained space that smelled of gasoline and dry rot, while other girls my age were learning how to apply eyeliner or worrying about which boy would ask them to the spring dance. I was scavenging parts from broken toasters and old remote control cars. I was building a robot. It was not anything advanced by the standards of my current company, but for a 13-year-old working with scrap metal and a soldering iron I had bought with my allowance, it was a masterpiece. It had 6 legs. Fashioned from aluminum siding I had cut with tin snips until my hands were covered in blisters. I had programmed a simple circuit board to make it navigate obstacles. It could sense a wall, back up, turn 30 degrees, and try again. It was persistent. It was logical. It was exactly like me. I remember the evening I finished it. It was a Tuesday in November. The garage was freezing, my breath puffing out in white clouds, but I was sweating with anticipation. I picked up the little metal spider, its servos whirring softly, and I carried it into the living room like it was the crown jewels. Frank was sitting in his leather recliner. the one nobody else was allowed to touch. The television was on, blaring the 6 o'clock news. Diane was in the kitchen, aggressively chopping vegetables, the knife hitting the cutting board with a rhythm that suggested she was angry about something she would never articulate. "Dad," I said. My voice was small. I cleared my throat and tried again. "Dad, look." He did not look away from the screen immediately. He finished watching a segment about the local weather forecast, a chance of rain, temperatures dropping to 40 degrees, before he slowly turned his head. His eyes were glazed, the look of a man who felt he had done his duty by simply providing the roof I was standing under. "What is it, Isla?" he asked. I set the robot down on the carpet. I flipped the switch. The little machine came to life. It skittered forward, the servos whining. It hit the leg of the coffee table, paused, reversed, turned, and marched toward the hallway. It worked perfectly. "I built it," I said, beaming. "It uses infrared sensors to map the room. I coded the logic loops myself." Frank looked at the robot. Then he looked at the grease smudge on my cheek. Then he looked at his watch. "That is nice," he said. The tone was flat, completely devoid of curiosity. It was the tone you use when a toddler hands you a drawing of a stick figure. "Don't let it scratch the floorboards. Your mother just waxed them." Then he turned back to the television. He did not ask how I did it. He did not ask where I learned about infrared sensors. He did not see the engineering. He only saw a potential scratch on his floor. I picked up my creation, turned it off, and walked back to the garage. I did not cry. I just disassembled the robot, piece by piece, and put the components into labeled drawers. That was the night I learned that in my house. Excellence was not an asset if it was not the right kind of excellence. Tessa, on the other hand, was the gold standard. 2 years later. Tessa made the varsity cheerleading squad. When she came home with the uniform, a short skirt and a shell top in the school colors of crimson and gold, it was treated like a coronation. Diane cleared off the mantle to display the team photo. Frank went to every single game, sitting in the bleachers, cheering louder than anyone else when Tessa was lifted into the air. It did not matter that Tessa had a C average in math. It did not matter that she barely read a book a year. She fit the mold. She was pretty. She was popular. And she projected the image of the all-American family that Frank and Diane were desperate to sell to the neighbors. She was their billboard. I was the fine print. During my sophomore year, I entered the state science fair. I had developed a piece of software that encrypted text messages using a polymorphic algorithm. It was complex stuff, light years ahead of the baking soda volcanoes and potato clocks on the other tables. The judges were university professors, and they spent 20 minutes grilling me, eyes wide with disbelief. I won first place. I won a scholarship for $500 and a large, gold-embossed certificate with a red ribbon. I came home that afternoon, bursting with a quiet, intense pride. The house was empty. Tessa was at practice. Frank was at work. Diane was out shopping. I placed the certificate on the kitchen island, right in the center, where it could not be missed. I propped it up against the fruit bowl. I wanted them to see it. I wanted, just for once, for the conversation at dinner to be about something I had done. I went to my room to do homework. I waited for the sound of the garage door. When I came down for dinner 3 hours later, the certificate was gone. Panic flared in my chest. Had they framed it? Had they taken it to show the neighbors? I looked around the kitchen. The counters were wiped clean. Then I saw it. On the side counter, where the junk mail and unpaid bills accumulated, was a stack of papers. On top of the stack was the electric bill. Underneath the electric bill, sticking out just an inch, was the gold edge of my certificate. Diane was stirring a pot of soup. "Mom," I said. Walking over to the stack, I pulled out the certificate. It had a coffee ring stain on the corner. "You saw this?" Diane glanced over her shoulder. "Oh, yes. Good job. Honey, can you set the table? Tessa will be home in 10 minutes, and she is starving. Training was brutal today. I won first place," I said, holding the paper. "In the state." "That is great." "Isla," she said. tasting the soup. Really? Now, forks and knives, please, and napkins, the cloth ones. I looked at the certificate. It meant less to her than the soup. It meant less to her than Tessa's appetite. I took the paper upstairs and slid it under my mattress. I never mentioned it again. That was the pattern. If I succeeded, it was ignored. If I struggled, it was proof of my defectiveness. But the worst moments were when my skills were useful to them. But my presence was not. I remember the charity fashion show Tessa organized when she was a senior. It was a massive event in the high school auditorium, designed to raise money for a cause I cannot even remember, though I am sure Tessa put it on her college application. Tessa was the director and the star model. But 2 hours before the curtain went up, the sound system died. The feedback was screeching. The microphones were dead, and the drama teacher was hyperventilating. Tessa was in the dressing room, having a meltdown, mascara running down her face. "My life is over," she was screaming. "Everyone is going to laugh at me." Diane grabbed my arm. Her grip was tight, her nails digging into my skin. "Isla, you know about computers and wires. Fix it." It wasn't a question. It was a command. I went into the sound booth. It was a mess of tangled cables and blown fuses. I spent 45 minutes rewiring the amplifier, bypassing the damaged equalizer, and syncing the inputs. My hands were covered in dust. My jeans were smeared with grease from crawling under the console. 10 minutes before the show started, I got it working. The music swelled, clear and crisp. I walked backstage, wiping my hands on a rag. Tessa was standing there, retouching her makeup, looking radiant in a silver gown. "It works," I said. Tessa didn't even look at me. She just took a deep breath, plastered on her stage smile, and walked out to the thunderous applause of the audience. "Thank you," she beamed into the microphone I had just fixed. "I have worked so hard to make this night perfect for you all." Frank and Diane were in the front row, clapping until their hands hurt. I stood in the wings, in the shadows, wearing my dirty jeans and a black t-shirt. Diane walked past me during the intermission. She saw me standing there, watching Tessa soak up the adoration. "Isla," she hissed, leaning in close. "Don't just stand there looking like a mechanic. Go sit in the back if you're going to dress like that. You are ruining the aesthetic." I went to the back. I sat in the very last row, in the dark, watching my sister shine using the electricity I had restored. That was when I learned the rule. The more capable I was, the more invisible I had to be. My competence was only valuable when it serviced their image. If I tried to claim ownership of it, I was being selfish. By the time I was 18, the labels had shifted. I wasn't just the quiet one anymore. I was difficult. Frank started using that word whenever I expressed an opinion that deviated from his worldview. If I questioned why we had to spend every holiday doing exactly what Tessa wanted, I was being difficult. If I chose to study computer science instead of nursing or teaching, professions he deemed appropriate for a young lady, I was being difficult. "Why do you always have to complicate things?" he asked me once, when I explained that I couldn't come to a family barbecue because I had a final exam for my advanced cryptography class. "It is like you try to be an outsider." "I am studying, Dad," I had said. "This is my career." "It is a barbecue, Isla," he snapped. "Family comes first, but you wouldn't understand that. You are too busy with your machines." He made my ambition sound like a disease. He made my focus sound like a betrayal. And Diane had her own phrase. It was her shield and her sword. "Don't make this about you." She used it whenever I was in pain, when I had the flu and couldn't help clean the house before a party. "Don't make this about you, Isla." When my first boyfriend cheated on me and I was crying in the kitchen. "Shh, Tessa has a date tonight. Don't make this about you and ruin her mood." They trained me, systematically, day by day, year by year, to disappear. They taught me that my voice was noise. My needs were burdens, and my talents were irrelevant unless they could be exploited. But standing in my lodge, looking at the snow piling up against the reinforced glass, I realized the truth that had taken me years to uncover. They didn't push me away because I was a failure. They didn't hide my awards because they were ashamed of them. They hated me because I didn't need them. Tessa needed their validation. She fed on it. She was a vessel that they could fill with their own egos. Without their applause, she withered. But I was a cactus in their garden of orchids. I grew in the dry, harsh conditions they created. I learned to store my own water. I learned to protect myself with spines. And the stronger I got, the taller I grew, the more I blocked their view of themselves. I was not the deadbeat. I was the mirror. And when they looked at me, they saw the reflection of their own neglect, and they hated the sight of it. So they tried to break the mirror. They thought that if they starved me of love, I would come crawling back, begging for scraps. They thought that by calling me difficult, they could shame me into compliance. They thought that by ignoring my achievements, they could make them disappear. They were wrong. All they did was teach me how to operate in the dark. All they did was teach me that if I wanted something built, I had to build it myself. If I wanted a system that worked, I had to code it from scratch. I looked down at my hands. They were manicured now, no longer stained with grease or solder, but the muscles underneath were the same. The brain that built the spider bot at 13 was the same brain that had just bought a mountain. They had spent 20 years training me to be invisible. They had no idea that invisibility is the greatest superpower a strategist can have. You can't fight what you can't see coming, and they definitely did not see me coming. The timeline of my education in human nature did not end when I left my parents' house at 18. If anything, the real curriculum began the moment I stepped into the corporate world. I thought I was escaping the suffocation of the green household, but I quickly learned that the corporate ladder is just a different kind of dysfunctional family, only with better lighting and worse coffee. I landed a job at Gray Oak Defense Lab straight out of college. On paper, it was a dream start. Gray Oak was a boutique firm that handled cybersecurity for mid-tier government contractors. In reality, it was a sweatshop disguised as an innovation hub. I worked 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. I lived on vending machine sandwiches and the adrenaline of solving puzzles that baffled men twice my age. I wrote the code that patched critical vulnerabilities in logistics software. I designed firewalls that stopped Russian botnets from mapping supply chains. I was good. I was terrifyingly good. But at Gray Oak, competence was a resource to be mined, not a talent to be rewarded. My direct supervisor was a man named Marcus. He had a firm handshake, a bright white smile, and the coding ability of a first-year remedial student. Every Friday, we had a team meeting where we presented our weekly progress to the senior partners. Every Friday, Marcus would stand at the front of the room, projecting my slides, explaining my algorithms, and using the word "I" with pathological frequency. I decided to reroute the traffic, he would say. I optimized the kernel. I sat in the back row, clutching a styrofoam cup of lukewarm water, watching him build a career on the foundation of my sleep deprivation. When I tried to speak up once, correcting him on a technical detail regarding encryption keys, he pulled me aside afterward. "Isla," he said, his voice dropping to that patronizing register my father used to use. "You are great at the technical stuff, but you don't understand the politics. Let me handle the room. You just handle the keyboard." That was the moment I realized I had traded one Frank Green for another. I quit the next morning. I did not give 2 weeks of notice. I left my badge on the desk, wiped my terminal, and walked out into the blinding sunlight of the parking lot. I felt free. That feeling lasted exactly 3 weeks. I started my own company, Lock River Systems. The name sounded imposing, like a fortress of digital stone. The reality was a one-bedroom apartment in a transitional neighborhood where the sirens were more common than birdsongs. My office was a second-hand desk squeezed between my bed and the wall. My server room was a stack of equipment humming on the kitchen counter, right next to a coffee maker that leaked brown water onto the laminate every time I tried to brew a pot. I burned through my savings in 4 months. I spent every cent on server space, software licenses, and insurance. I ate instant noodles. I kept the heat set to 55 degrees. I wore sweaters indoors. I told myself this was the startup life. This was the montage part of the movie before the hero wins. Then I landed the whale. It was a logistics company called Vector Transcontinental. They needed a complete overhaul of their internal security protocols. The contract was worth $40,000. It was enough to keep me afloat for a year. It was enough to prove I could do this. I worked for 6 weeks straight. I barely slept. I rewrote their entire authentication architecture. I delivered the product 2 days ahead of schedule. It was flawless. I sent the invoice. 30 days passed. No payment. I sent a polite reminder. 45 days passed. No payment. I called their accounts payable department. I was transferred to voicemail. I called again. Finally, on day 60, I got an email from their legal department. It was 3 sentences long. It stated that due to performance inconsistencies and potential breaches of service-level agreements, they were withholding payment and reserving the right to seek damages. It was a lie, a bold, flat-out lie designed to crush a vendor too small to fight back. They knew I was a one-woman shop. They knew I couldn't afford a lawyer to sue them for the $40,000. They were banking on my bankruptcy. I sat in my freezing apartment, staring at the email. The coffee maker hissed and spat a puddle of hot water onto the counter, narrowly missing the termination letter. I had $300 in my bank account. Rent was due in 48 hours. My server bills were due the next day. If I missed the server payment, Lock River Systems would go offline, and my reputation would be incinerated. I had no choice. I picked up my phone. My hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from the nausea of what I was about to do. I navigated to the contact I had avoided for years. Dad. I pressed call. It rang 5 times. He answered on the 6th. His voice clipped. Hello? Hi, Dad, I said. I tried to keep my voice steady, but I heard the wobble in it. It is Isla. Isla, he said. He didn't sound happy to hear from me. He sounded suspicious. Is everything all right? I am fine, I lied. Well, actually, I am in a bit of a bind, a business bind. I explained it as quickly as I could. I didn't tell him about the noodles or the heat. I just told him about the client, the withheld payment, and the temporary cash flow gap. I asked for a loan, $5,000, just enough to cover rent and the servers until I could figure out the next move. I offered to pay interest. I offered to sign a contract. There was a silence on the line. I could hear the television in the background. Fox News. Probably. So, Frank said slowly, you quit your steady job at the defense lab, the one with benefits. They were stealing my work, Dad. And you started this venture, he continued, ignoring my defense. And now you are broke. I am not broke because the business is bad, I argued, desperation creeping in. I am broke because a client is unethical. I just need a bridge. Isla, he said. The tone was not sympathetic. It was the tone of a judge delivering a sentence he had written long ago. We told you that leaving Gray Oak was a mistake. We told you that you were not ready to run a business. You are impulsive. You always have been. I am asking for a loan. Dad, not a gift. And if I give it to you, what lesson do you learn? He asked. Money doesn't solve problems caused by poor judgment. You made your choices. You wanted to be independent. This is what independence looks like. Dad, I am going to lose my apartment. Then maybe you will move back home and find a real job. He said, we can't fund your fantasies, Isla. It wouldn't be fair to Tessa. She and Miles are saving for a house. We have to be equitable. He brought up Tessa. He always brought up Tessa. Okay, I whispered. I understand. Good luck, he said, and hung up. I sat there, the phone warm against my ear, the dial tone buzzing. He had the money. I knew he had the money. He had just bought a new truck. He wasn't protecting his retirement. He was protecting his worldview. If he helped me, he would be admitting that my risk was valid by letting me fail. He got to be right. I looked at the contact list again. Tessa. I shouldn't have done it. I knew I shouldn't have done it, but fear makes you do stupid things. I called her. Hey, she answered. There was clinking in the background. Silverware on china. Laughter. Isla? Oh my God. Random. I am at brunch with the girls. What is up? I am sorry to bother you, I said. I really am. But I am in trouble. Tess, I didn't give her the full pitch. I just said I was short on rent because of a business issue and asked if she could lend me $2,000. Miles, her husband, was an investment banker. $2,000 was a bottle of wine for them. Tessa let out a short, sharp laugh. It sounded like glass breaking. Wait, she said. You are asking me for money? I thought you were the big CEO now, Lock River Systems, right? It is a cash flow issue, I said. My teeth clenched so hard my jaw ached. Oh, Isla, she sighed. Mom said this would happen. You try to run before you can walk. Are you already failing? It has been, what, 6 months? I am not failing. I am getting stiffed. Look, I can't ask Miles for money to bail you out, she said. Her voice lost the bubbly brunch tone and went cold. It looks bad. We have our own financial goals. And honestly, it feels like enabling. Maybe you should just admit this tech thing isn't working and go back to that other job. You were safer there. Thanks, Tessa, I said. Don't be mad, she said breezily. I am just being honest. Love you. Gotta go. Our mimosas are here. The line went dead. I put the phone down on the desk. I looked around the apartment. It felt smaller. The walls seemed to be leaning in. I realized something then. Sitting in the cold. My family did not refuse to help me because they couldn't. They refused because they enjoyed the power of the refusal. They liked me on my knees. They liked the version of Isla who was desperate, broken, and proving them right. My success was a threat to the family hierarchy. My failure was the glue that held them together. I buried my face in my hands. I was ready to give up. I was ready to call the landlord, break the lease, and accept the humiliation of moving back into my childhood bedroom. The phone rang. I stared at it. It wasn't Frank. It wasn't Tessa. The screen said, Uncle Wade. I wiped my eyes. I didn't want to answer. Wade was the family cynic. The man who showed up to Christmas smelling of cigar smoke and looking bored. We weren't close, not really, but I picked up. Hello? Your mother just called me, Wade said. His voice was gravelly, deep and unhurried. She told me you were harassing them for money. She said you were having a breakdown and screaming at them. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. I didn't scream. I asked for a loan. She said you are bankrupt, Wade continued. Said you are losing the business. I am not losing it, I snapped, the anger finally breaking through the despair. I am being robbed by a client who knows I can't afford to sue them. I did the work. They owe me $40,000. They are banking on me folding before I can fight. There was a pause on the line, a long one. Tell me everything, Wade said. What? Don't give me the family gossip version, he said. Give me the business version. Who is the client? What is the contract? Do you have paper trails? Do you have the emails? So I told him. I spoke for 10 minutes straight. I laid out the timeline, the deliverables, the acceptance protocols I had made them sign, the exact wording of the rejection email. I spoke to him not as a niece to an uncle, but as a CEO to an investor. When I finished, Wade hummed. You have them dead to rights, he said. They are bluffing. They do this to small vendors all the time. It is a line item in their accounting strategy. Squeeze the little guys. See who folds. I know that, I said, but I can't hire a lawyer. I have $300. I know a guy, Wade said. Name is Kessler. He is a mean son of a bitch. He hates big logistics companies. I will call him. He will take the case on contingency. He won't charge you a dime up front. He will take 30% of the settlement. I felt the air rush back into my lungs. You would do that? I am not giving you money, Isla, Wade said sternly. I am not your piggy bank. If I give you cash, you learn nothing. But I will give you ammunition. Thank you, I choked out. Wade, thank you. But there is a condition, he said. Anything. When you get this money, And you will get it. Because Kessler is a shark. You rebuild this company clean. You build a war chest. You save 6 months of operating expenses before you buy a single fancy chair. And you never, ever beg Frank or Tessa for a damn thing again. You hear me? I hear you. They want you to be weak, Wade said. Do not give them the satisfaction. Silence is expensive. Isla, success is the only thing that pays for it. I promise, I said. Good. Kessler will call you in 10 minutes. Have your files ready. He hung up. 10 minutes later, Kessler called. He listened for 3 minutes. He laughed when I read him the rejection letter. He sent a demand letter on his letterhead within the hour. Vector Transcontinental paid the full invoice plus late fees 3 days later. They didn't want a lawsuit. They just wanted an easy victim. Once I showed teeth, they backed down. The check cleared. I paid my rent. I paid the server bill. I bought a new coffee maker, a cheap one, but one that didn't leak. I sat at my desk, looking at the bank balance. It wasn't a fortune, but it was freedom. I picked up my phone. I opened my contacts. I had a group labeled Family Emergency. It contained Frank, Diane, and Tessa. It was the digital parachute I had kept, subconsciously hoping that if I fell hard enough, they would catch me. I looked at the group. I thought about Frank's voice saying, "You made your choices." I thought about Tessa's laugh. I didn't feel sad anymore. I felt cold. I felt focused. I pressed edit. I selected the group. I pressed delete. The names vanished. I wasn't an orphan, but in that moment, I became something else. I became a woman who owed them nothing. I had asked for help for the last time. From now on, if they wanted into my life, they would have to knock on the door of the fortress I was building, and I would be the one deciding if the gate opened. The check from Vector Transcontinental saved me, but it also taught me a lesson that no MBA program could offer. It taught me that survival is not about being the biggest animal in the forest. It is about being the one with the deadliest venom. Lock River Systems had been a desperate scramble for cash, a company built on panic and caffeine. I dissolved it 3 months later. I did not want a company that begged for work. I wanted a company that people feared not hiring. I started over. I named the new entity Sable Route Security. The name was deliberate. Sable is dark, hard to see at night. A route is a path. We were the dark path, the ones who moved the data through the hostile territory of the internet without leaving a footprint. I rented a small office in an industrial park, far away from the glass towers where my sister's husband, Miles, played at being a master of the universe. My office had concrete floors and exposed ductwork. It was cold, efficient, and devoid of ego. I hired 4 people. I did not hire them for their resumes or their ability to play office politics. I hired them because they were paranoid. I hired a former black hat hacker named Jinx who looked like he hadn't slept since 2012, and a systems architect named Sarah who treated firewalls like religious texts. We do not sell promises. I told them on day 1. We sell proof. We do not want applause. We want silence. If we are doing our job right, nobody knows we exist. We focused on a single niche, securing patient data transfer for mid-sized healthcare networks. It was unsexy work. It was high liability, and it was exactly where I wanted to be. For 18 months, we were ghosts. We built a reputation for being expensive and impossible to work with, which, in the cybersecurity world, is the highest form of compliment. Then came the Tuesday that almost ended us. It was 2 p.m. I was deep in a code review when Jinx spun his chair around, his face pale under the fluorescent lights. "Isla," he said. "Someone is inside the perimeter." My heart hammered against my ribs. A sudden, violent rhythm. "Show me." I rolled my chair over. On his screen, the logs were scrolling faster than the human eye could read, but the pattern was unmistakable. An unauthorized admin account had been created on our client's server. They weren't stealing data yet. They were looking around. They were mapping the vault. "Kill the connection," I ordered. "Sever the external uplink. Go dark." If we go dark, The hospital can't transfer ER records. Sarah argued from her desk. People could die. If they ransom the data, the hospital closes and everyone loses. I snapped. Cut it. We pulled the plug. For 3 hours, we fought them in the digital trenches. We traced the intrusion back. It wasn't a sophisticated code injection. It wasn't a zero-day exploit. It was social engineering. One of the hospital's receptionists had received a call from someone claiming to be from IT support. The caller had been charming, helpful, and patient. He had convinced her to reset her password and read it to him. We stopped the attack before a single byte of patient data was exfiltrated. We scrubbed the system, patched the hole, and brought the network back online. But the damage to my psyche was done. We had been vulnerable. Most CEOs would have buried it. They would have called it a glitch or a maintenance outage. They would have protected the stock price. I thought about my father. I thought about how he hid the electric bill over my science award. I thought about how my family covered up every crack in the plaster with a coat of bright paint. No, I said to the room. We are not hiding this. If we tell the client their employee let a hacker in, they will fire us, Jinx said. If we don't tell them, we are just like every other liar in a suit, I said. I hired an independent audit firm the next morning. I gave them full access to our logs. I told them to tear us apart. Then, I wrote a report. It was 10 pages long. It detailed exactly how the attack happened, how we stopped it, and crucially, how we were going to change the human protocols to ensure it never happened again. I sent the report to the hospital board. I also published a redacted version on our company blog. I waited for the lawsuit. I waited to be fired. Instead, the phone rang. It was the CEO of a major regional hospital chain, a competitor to our current client. Ms. Green, he said, I just read your incident report. I assume you are calling to tell me you will never hire us, I said, bracing for impact. On the contrary, he said, I have 5 security vendors pitching me right now. They all tell me they are invincible. You are the only one who told me the truth about how fragile this actually is. I can't work with liars. Ms. Green, I need someone who knows how to bleed and keep fighting. He signed a contract with Sableroot 3 days later. It was worth $2 million a year. The money hit the business account, and the first thing I did was call a staff meeting. I looked at Jinx, Sarah, and the 2 junior analysts. They looked ragged. They had been in the trenches with me. They expected a pizza party, maybe a gift card. I remember working at a place called Grey Oak, I told them. I remember saving the company $100,000 and getting a pat on the back while my boss bought a new boat. I slid 4 envelopes across the table. Jinx opened his. He stared at the check. Isla, this is $20,000. That is your share of the signing bonus, I said. You built the wall? You get paid for the bricks? Sarah started crying. I didn't hug her. I didn't make a speech about family. I just nodded. Get back to work, I said. We have a hospital to protect. That was the moment Sableroot stopped being a company and became a fortress. We grew. We didn't explode. We expanded like a glacier, slow, heavy, and crushing anything in our path. We took on 3 more hospital chains. We secured a biotech firm. By the time Briarstone Consolidated approached me, I was 26 years old. Briarstone was a private equity firm that bought security companies, stripped them for parts, and sold the client lists. When their acquisition VP, a man named Sterling who wore a suit that cost more than my first car, walked into my office, he looked like he owned the place already. We have been watching you, Isla, he said, sitting down without asking. You are making a lot of noise in a quiet sector. I thought the point was to be quiet, I said, leaning back in my chair. We want to buy Sableroot, he said. We are prepared to offer you $4 million. You walk away. We absorb the staff and the contracts. No, I said. Sterling blinked. Excuse me? My staff stays together, I said. Their contracts are guaranteed for 3 years, no layoffs, and the tech stack remains independent. You don't strip it, you license it. That is not how we do business, Sterling said, his smile tightening. Then get out of my office, I said. I don't need to sell. I am profitable. I am happy. And I am very, very busy. I turned back to my monitors. Sterling didn't leave. He sat there for a full minute. He realized then that I wasn't negotiating for a better price on a used car. I was telling him the reality of the situation. $6 million, he said. And we keep the team. $8 million, I countered, not looking up. Cash, plus a separate retention pool for the employees, and I stay on as a consultant with veto power over operational changes for 12 months. He authorized the deal 48 hours later. When the wire transfer hit my personal account, I stared at the number on the screen. $8 million. It was a number that made no sense to my brain. It was a telephone number. It was a coordinate. My father, Frank, had worked 40 years to save $300,000 in a retirement account that he guarded like a dragon. I had just made 20 times that in a single signature. I could have bought a penthouse in the city. I could have bought a Lamborghini and driven it past my parents' house slowly, revving the engine. But revenge is not about showing off. Revenge is about control. I opened a real estate listing I had been tracking for months. It was a property 2 hours north. Deep in the mountains, it was an old lodge, built in the 1920s, sitting on 40 acres of pine forest and granite. It was isolated. It was defensible. I bought it cash. I didn't hire an interior decorator. I hired a security contractor. I want a perimeter fence, I told the contractor as we stood in the snow, looking at the winding access road. 8 feet high, anti-climb mesh. I want sensors on the driveway that can classify a vehicle by its weight distribution. I want cameras with facial recognition at the gate. Ms. Green, the contractor said, looking at me nervously. This is a vacation home. Are you expecting a cartel hit? I am expecting family, I said, which is worse. We installed the gate. It was a masterpiece of black steel, heavy and silent. It had an intercom system that routed directly to my phone. It had a magnetic lock that could withstand 5,000 pounds of force. I spent the next 2 months turning the lodge into a sanctuary. I stocked the wine cellar. I filled the pantry with imported goods. I bought furniture that was comfortable, not just expensive. I created a place that felt like the warm, safe home I had never had. But the most important feature was the control panel in the master bedroom. From there, I could see every inch of the property. I could lock every door. I could turn off the lights. I could control who entered and who left. It was late November when Wade called me. I was sitting on the deck, wrapped in a cashmere blanket, watching the first real snow of the season dust the tops of the pine trees. I heard you sold the company, Wade said. Congratulations, kid. You did it. I did, I said. The air was crisp and cold, filling my lungs with clarity. So, Wade asked, what now? You have the money, you have the time. What are you going to do with Christmas? Frank is already telling people you are probably going to go to Europe to avoid them. I smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of the wolf who has just finished building the trap. I am not going to Europe, Wade, I said. Then what? I am going to host, I said. I am going to throw the biggest, most lavish, most traditional Christmas this family has ever seen, and I am going to do it here, at the lodge. Frank won't come, Wade warned. He won't drive 2 hours to a house you own just to be proven wrong. He will come, I said softly, because I am going to invite everyone else first. I am going to invite the cousins he tries to impress. I am going to invite the neighbors he competes with. When he realizes that the entire audience is here, he will have to come. He can't stand an empty theater. You are planning a siege, Wade said, chuckling darkly. I am planning a lesson, I corrected. You really want to do this? I have the deed to the land, Wade, I said, looking at the black steel gate down the hill. I have the keys. For the first time in my life, I am the one holding the door. All right, Wade said. I will wait for the invite. It is coming, I said. And Wade? Yeah? Tell the rest of them to pack warm, I said. It is going to be a cold winter. I hung up the phone. The wind howled through the valley. A lonely, powerful sound. I was dangerous now, not because I had $8 million, but because I no longer needed their permission to exist. I had built my own world, and soon, very soon, they would be standing outside of it, freezing, waiting for me to decide if they were worthy of coming in. Deadbeats, I whispered to the snow. We will see. I went inside and locked the door. The sound of the heavy bolt sliding home was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a story that was finally, truly mine. The guest list was not long, but it was heavy with history. I sat at the island in my kitchen, the granite cool under my palms, and scrolled through the names I had selected. I did not choose them based on their net worth or their social standing. I did not choose them because they could offer me a job or elevate my reputation. I chose them because, at one point or another in the last 20 years, they had seen me when I was invisible to everyone else. There was Aunt Sarah, my mother's older sister, who had slipped me books on coding and engineering when I was 15, whispering that I should keep my brain sharp even if nobody noticed. There were the Davises, the couple who lived 3 houses down from my childhood home, who used to accidentally make too much lasagna on nights they knew my parents were out at a gala, leaving me alone with a microwave dinner. There was Cousin Ben, the graphic designer who had been mocked by Uncle Wade for not going into finance, the only other person at family reunions who stood near the punch bowl looking for an escape route. I did not send formal invitations embossed with gold leaf. That was Diane's style. She treated Christmas like a diplomatic summit where the stationery mattered more than the sentiment. Instead, I sent a simple text message. I sent it individually to each person, personalizing the opening, but the core offer remained the same. If you want a calm Christmas, come to the lodge. No dress code, no speeches, just good food and a fire. I am sending a car for you. I hit send on the last one. Then, I waited. I expected questions. I expected them to ask if my parents were coming. I expected them to ask why I was doing this. But the replies came back within minutes. We would love to. Is this real? I am in. Thank you. Isla, we really need this. Nobody asked about Frank. Nobody asked about Tessa. It was as if they all collectively understood that a calm Christmas implicitly meant a Christmas without the Green family hierarchy. They were tired too. They were tired of the performance. The logistics of the event were executed with the same precision I applied to a server migration. I hired a private transport service. Black SUVs were dispatched to 4 different towns to pick up my guests. I wanted them to feel taken care of from the moment they stepped out of their front doors. I wanted them to know that this was not a burden I was placing on them. It was a gift. At the lodge, the staff moved like clockwork. I had a chef named Marcus in the kitchen, prepping a menu that was comfort food elevated to art: roast beef, mashed potatoes with truffle oil, homemade bread that smelled like yeast and safety. I had a housekeeping team that had fluffed every pillow and stocked every bathroom with towels that felt like clouds. But the most important briefing happened at the front gate. I stood in the snow, wearing a heavy wool coat, looking at the head of my security detail. A man named Elias. He was former military, a man of few words and absolute observational skills. Here's the guest list, I said, handing him a tablet. These are the license plates of the transport vehicles. They are the only vehicles authorized to enter. Elias scanned the list. And if anyone else shows up? If the Pope shows up, and he is not on that list, he stays on the other side of the gate, I said. If my parents show up, if my sister shows up, you are polite, you are professional, but the gate stays closed. Do you understand? Understood, Ms. Green, Elias said. He didn't ask why. He didn't need the family drama. He just needed the rules of engagement. The first car arrived at 4 p.m. on Christmas Eve. It was the Davises. When Mrs. Davis stepped out of the car, wrapped in a thick scarf, she looked up at the lodge, the timber beams, the floor-to-ceiling glass glowing with warm yellow light against the twilight. and she covered her mouth with her hand. I walked down the steps to meet them. Isla, Mr. Davis said, shaking his head. This place, it is incredible. It is home, I said, hugging them both. Come inside. It is freezing. By 6 o'clock, the lodge was full. There were 20 people in total. It wasn't a crowd, but it felt like a village. The atmosphere was jarring at first, simply because of what was missing. There was no tension. In my parents' house, the hours before Christmas dinner were a minefield. Diane would be screaming about coasters. Frank would be critiquing the volume of the music. Tessa would be directing everyone on where to stand so the lighting was best for her photos. Here, Cousin Ben was sitting on the rug by the fire, teaching Aunt Sarah's grandson how to play a game on a tablet. Mrs. Davis was in the kitchen, chatting with the chef, who was laughing and letting her taste the gravy. People were wearing sweaters and jeans. Some had taken their shoes off. I stood on the mezzanine, looking down at the great room. A 20-foot pine tree stood in the corner, decorated with simple white lights and glass ornaments. It wasn't themed. It wasn't branded. It was just a tree. You did good, kid. I turned. Uncle Wade was standing next to me, holding a tumbler of bourbon. He had arrived an hour ago, and for the first time in my life, I saw him relaxed. His shoulders were down. He didn't look like he was bracing for an argument. It feels strange, I admitted. I keep waiting for someone to yell. That is the trauma talking, Wade said, taking a sip. Silence isn't empty. Isla, it is just space. You get to decide what you fill it with. I filled it with people who don't need anything from me, I said. That is the best kind of company, he replied. Below us, laughter erupted, real laughter, not the polite tittering that followed one of Frank's bad jokes, but a belly laugh from Cousin Ben. I walked down the stairs and joined them. I didn't make a speech. I didn't clink a glass and demand everyone's attention. I just walked over to the buffet, picked up a plate, and got in line behind Aunt Sarah. The beef looks amazing, she whispered to me, squeezing my arm. Isla, I am so proud of you. And I don't mean the house. I mean this, the piece. Thanks, Aunt Sarah, I said. The evening blurred into a warm haze of food and conversation. We ate at a long table made of reclaimed wood. We passed bowls of potatoes and roasted vegetables. We told stories, for the first time. I heard stories about my childhood that I didn't remember. Stories about me being funny, or clever, or kind. These people had held on to versions of me that my parents had discarded. Inevitably, the phones came out. I hadn't banned them. I wasn't a tyrant. Cousin Ben took a selfie with me and Aunt Sarah in front of the tree. The background showed the soaring ceilings of the lodge and the snow falling softly outside the massive windows. Can I post this? He asked. I mean, I don't want to blow your cover if you are in witness protection. I smiled. Post it. I don't mind. He tapped his screen. I knew what was happening. The digital signal was going out. Christmas at Isla's place. Within 20 minutes, I saw the ripple effect. Other cousins were checking their phones, showing each other screens. The likes were coming in. The comments were popping up. Where is this? Is that Isla? She looks amazing. Why weren't we invited? And the most telling silence of all, the lack of interaction from Frank, Diane, or Tessa. They were seeing it. I knew they were seeing it. They were sitting in their perfectly curated living room, surrounded by the right people, scrolling through Instagram and realizing that the party of the year was happening without them. They were seeing the people they had dismissed, the deadbeats, the poor relations, the difficult daughter, having the time of their lives in a mansion that made their house look like a cottage. It was a specific kind of injury. It wasn't just exclusion. It was irrelevance. We weren't mourning their absence. We hadn't even noticed it. Around 9 o'clock, the energy settled into a contented lull. The kids were asleep on the sofas. The adults were drinking wine and watching the fire. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a text from Wade, or maybe a furious message from Tessa, but the screen was dark. It was a call. The caller ID said, First Republic Bank, fraud prevention. The room was warm, but a sudden chill ran down my spine. I stepped away from the group, walking toward the hallway where it was quieter. "This is Isla Green," I answered. "Good evening, Miss Green," a woman's voice said. She sounded professional, apologetic. "I am so sorry to disturb you on Christmas Eve. We have a flag on your account that requires immediate verification." "What kind of flag?" I asked. My voice dropped to a flat business tone. "We received an urgent application for a personal line of credit in your name about 2 hours ago," the woman said. "It was for a significant amount, $50,000. I stopped walking. I stared at the stone wall of the hallway. "I did not apply for a loan," I said. "We suspected as much," the agent said. "The application was submitted online. The digital signature matches your previous documents. But the IP address, well, that is why we called." "Where is the IP address from?" I asked. Though I already knew the answer, I could feel it in my stomach. A sick, heavy weight. "It originated from a residential address in Oak Creek," she said. "The device is registered to a Frank Green." The air in the hallway seemed to vanish. My father, on Christmas Eve, while I was hosting his family, feeding his sister, providing the warmth he had refused to give me, he was sitting in his house, logging into a computer, and trying to borrow $50,000 in my name. He wasn't just mad that I had won. He was trying to make me pay for it. He felt so entitled to my success, so entitled to my resources, that he didn't even think he needed to ask. He thought he could just take it. "Ms. Green?" the agent asked. "Are you there?" "I am here," I said. "Do you want to authorize this transaction?" I looked back into the great room. I saw Aunt Sarah laughing. I saw the firelight dancing on the walls. I saw the sanctuary I had built to keep the monsters out. But the monster was already inside. He wasn't physically here, but he had found a way to slide under the door. "No," I said. "I do not authorize it." "Okay," the agent said. "I will cancel the application. We can flag this as an error if—" "It is not an error," I interrupted. My hand gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "It is fraud." There was a pause on the line. "If you mark it as fraud, Ms. Green, we are legally required to open an investigation. It will involve the police. Given the name on the device—" "I know," I said. I closed my eyes. I thought about the robot I built when I was 13. I thought about the deadbeat text. I thought about the years of being told I was difficult, selfish, and ungrateful. They wanted a check. They wanted to use my name to patch over their own cracks. They thought I would be too scared, too desperate for their love, to stop them. "Ms. Green?" I opened my eyes. "File the report," I said. "Freeze everything. Are you sure?" "Yes," I said. "Merry Christmas." I hung up the phone. The music in the other room was playing Silent Night. It sounded beautiful. It sounded like a funeral hymn for the family I used to have. I put the phone back in my pocket and walked back toward the light. The party was still going. The peace was still there. But now, underneath the floorboards, the war had officially begun. I stepped away from the warmth of the hallway and walked straight into my office, closing the heavy oak door behind me. The sound of Silent Night was instantly severed, replaced by the hum of my server rack in the corner. I did not sit down. I did not turn on the overhead lights. I only activated my laptop, the screen casting a blue clinical glow over my face. I needed to see it. The bank agent had been polite, but I was not in the business of trusting voices on the phone. I was in the business of verification. My fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing the consumer-grade interface of my credit monitoring service and digging directly into the raw data logs I had set up for my personal identity protection. There it was, a hard inquiry. Time stamped 2 hours and 14 minutes ago. Amount requested, $50,000. Applicant, Isla Green. Social Security number, mine. Current employer, Sable Root Security. Income stated, $300,000 a year. I stared at the income line. They had guessed. They knew I had money, but they had severely underestimated how much. It was a small, bitter comfort. Then I looked at the metadata. The application hadn't been filed from a mobile device or a public terminal. It had been filed from a desktop computer running an outdated version of Windows. I traced the IP address. It wasn't difficult. I had flagged this specific IP address years ago in my personal firewall, labeling it home base, so I could filter out my mother's accidental clicks on phishing links. It was them. It wasn't a hacker in a basement in Eastern Europe. It wasn't a clerical error. It was a computer sitting on a mahogany desk in a suburb 200 miles south, likely surrounded by Christmas cards and a plate of cookies. My stomach turned over, not with fear, but with a cold, hard realization. This was not a crime of opportunity. This was a crime of entitlement. My phone, sitting on the desk where I had placed it, began to vibrate. It danced across the polished wood surface, making a low, angry buzzing sound. I looked at the screen. Dad. The timing was impeccable. He wasn't calling to confess. He was calling because he had seen the Instagram photos. He was calling because the loan application hadn't been instantly approved, and he was likely frustrated, needing a punching bag to vent his adrenaline. I took a breath. I didn't compose myself. I dismantled myself. I turned off the part of me that was a daughter. I turned off the part of me that wanted approval. I activated the part of me that negotiated hostage situations for hospital data centers. I swiped green and put the phone to my ear. I didn't say hello. "You have some nerve," Frank's voice exploded through the speaker. It was loud, distorted by the poor signal of his rage. "You have some absolute nerve. Isla, Merry Christmas to you too." "Frank," I said. My voice was level, stripped of all inflection. "Don't you get smart with me," he snapped. "I just got off the phone with your Aunt Sarah. She says she is at a lodge. She says she is with you. She says half the neighborhood is there." "She is," I said. "We are having dessert. The tart cherry pie is excellent." "You went behind our backs," he shouted. "You invited everyone, except your own parents and your sister. Do you have any idea how that looks? Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is for us? The Millers asked us why we weren't tagged in the photos. They asked if there was a rift. You are humiliating this family." "I didn't invite everyone," I corrected him calmly. "I invited the people who have actually shown up for me in the last decade. It just so happens that you and Mom weren't on that list." "We are your parents," he yelled. "We gave you life. You don't just cut us out of Christmas because you are having a tantrum." "I am not having a tantrum, Dad. I am having a party. And from where I am standing, it is a very successful one." He sputtered. I could hear him pacing. I could hear Diane in the background, her voice shrill, asking what I was saying. "Where is this place?" Frank demanded. Shifting tactics. "Sarah said it is huge. She said it has a gate." "Who are you renting it from? A boyfriend? Did you find some rich idiot to pay your way?" I looked around my office. I looked at the deed framed on the wall, discreetly tucked behind a fern. "I am not renting it," I said. "Don't lie to me," he scoffed. "I know what rent is in the mountains during peak season. It is $5,000 a night, minimum. You don't have that kind of money. You were begging us for a loan not that long ago. That was 5 years ago. Dad, people don't change that much," he said dismissively. "So who is he? Who is paying for this charade?" "I bought it," I said. The silence on the other end was absolute. It lasted for 5 seconds, 10 seconds. "You what?" His voice had dropped. It wasn't angry anymore. It was confused. "I bought the lodge," I repeated, enunciating every syllable. "I bought the land. I bought the road. I bought the gate that you are not currently driving through. I paid cash." "How?" The word came out breathless. "I sold my company," I said. "Sable Root Security. I sold it to Briarstone Consolidated 3 months ago." I could practically hear the gears grinding in his head. He was rewriting history in real time. He was deleting the deadbeat narrative and replacing it with something else, something more useful. "You sold the company?" he asked. His tone had changed completely. It was no longer the voice of a disciplinarian. It was the voice of a partner, a co-conspirator. For how much? Enough, I said. Isla, he said, and the warmth in his voice was so fake it made my skin crawl. Why didn't you tell us? This is incredible news. This changes everything. Does it? I asked. Does it change the text you sent me this morning calling me a deadbeat? Oh, come on, he chuckled, a nervous, dismissive sound. That was just tough love. We were worried about you. We wanted to motivate you. And look, it worked. You see? We pushed you, and you succeeded. You didn't push me, I said. You abandoned me. We are a family, he said, his voice hardening slightly, sensing that the charm wasn't working. And families share their success. You know, we supported you for 18 years. We paid for your clothes, your food. We made sacrifices so you could have that brain of yours. It is only right that when one of us wins, we all win. We deserve a family share. Isla, especially with the trouble Miles is in. He stopped. He hadn't meant to say that last part. What trouble is Miles in? I asked. Nothing, he said quickly. Just market volatility, liquidity issues. The point is, we are a unit, and if you are sitting on a pile of cash, you need to do the right thing. I looked at the laptop screen. I looked at the fraudulent application. Is that why you did it? I asked. Did what? Is that why you tried to help yourself? I asked softly. Because you felt you were entitled to a family share? I don't know what you're talking about, he said. But the confidence was gone. Dad, I said, I am looking at a credit alert on my screen right now. I am hanging up, he said. Don't, I said. My voice was a whip. If you hang up, I call the police immediately. If you stay on the line, I might wait 5 minutes. He stayed on the line. I could hear his breathing. It was heavy, ragged. Why is there a loan application for $50,000 in my name? I asked. Why was it submitted from an IP address in Oak Creek? Why does it list my social security number? You are being paranoid, he said, but it was weak. Identity theft happens all the time. You probably left your info insecure. You were always sloppy. I run a cybersecurity firm, Dad, I said. I am the least sloppy person you have ever met. I traced the signal. It came from your house. That is impossible, he lied. Maybe the Wi-Fi was hacked. Maybe a neighbor used our signal. The application was filled out on a desktop computer, I said. Running Windows 10. The one in your study. The one you refuse to update because you say the new interface confuses you. Stop it, he hissed. Stop interrogating me. I am your father. Did you think I wouldn't notice? I asked. Or did you think that even if I noticed, I wouldn't do anything about it? Did you think I would just pay it off quietly to avoid a scene? Is that what you think of me? That I'm just a purse that breathes? We needed the money, he snapped. The pretense fell away. The lie shattered. Miles made a bad call. He leveraged the house. Our house. Isla. We are underwater. We needed a bridge loan until his bonus clears in January. It was just a loan. We were going to pay it back before you even saw the statement. You committed a felony, I said. I was saving the family, he shouted. We were going to lose the house. What was I supposed to do? Ask you? You, who never calls? You, who hoards your money while your sister suffers? You are selfish, Isla. You have always been selfish. I stood there, letting his words wash over me. They didn't hurt anymore. They just clarified things. He didn't see me as a person. He didn't see me as a daughter. He saw me as an asset to be liquidated when the preferred assets, Tessa and Miles, failed to perform. He was willing to ruin my credit, ruin my name, and risk my freedom, just to cover up Miles's gambling or incompetence. You called me a deadbeat this morning, I said quietly. But a deadbeat is someone who doesn't pay their debts. A deadbeat is someone who lives off others. I think we both know who the real deadbeat is now. Don't you dare, he warned. If you report this, if you drag our name through the mud, I will never forgive you. You never forgave me for being born. Dad, I said. I think I can live with you not forgiving me for protecting myself. Isla, he screamed. I denied the loan, I said. The bank has flagged it as fraud. An investigation file has been opened. Fix it, he demanded. Call them back. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you authorized it. I can't do that, I said, because that would be a lie, and I am done protecting your lies. You are destroying this family. No, I said, I am just refusing to pay for it anymore. I pulled the phone away from my ear. He was still screaming, a tinny, pathetic sound coming from the speaker. I pressed the red button. The silence rushed back into the room. It was absolute. I stood there for a long time, my hand gripping the phone. My heart was pounding, but my mind was crystal clear. It was done. The umbilical cord hadn't just been cut. It had been cauterized. I didn't cry. I wanted to. Part of me felt the sting of tears behind my eyes, but I forced them back. Tears were for people who had hope that things could be different. I had no hope left. I only had strategy. I opened my messaging app. I found Wade. I typed, I think they tried to borrow money in my name. 50,000. I have the IP logs. He just admitted it on the phone. The reply came back in seconds. Wade didn't offer sympathy. He didn't offer shock. He knew them as well as I did. Then we don't argue. Wade wrote, we document. Save the logs. Save the call record. Do not delete anything. I am coming to the office. I am okay. I typed back, I know you are. He replied, but you are not alone. There is a difference. I locked the screen. I looked at the door leading back to the party. I could hear faint laughter. I fixed my hair in the reflection of the window. I straightened my spine. I was not the victim here. I was the witness, and the trial was just beginning. The snow began to fall in earnest around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It was not the gentle, cinematic dusting that looks good on greeting cards. This was a mountain storm, a wall of white that descended with the intention of erasing the world. The wind howled through the Douglas firs, shaking the heavy boughs, and the temperature plummeted to 10 degrees below zero. Inside the lodge, the storm was nothing more than atmosphere. The radiant floor heating kept the slate tiles warm against our socks. The triple-paned glass turned the violence of the wind into a silent movie. The generator I had installed, a massive industrial beast buried in a soundproof bunker, hummed imperceptibly, ready to take over if the grid failed. I had enough food for a month. I had firewood stacked to the ceiling in the garage. I had prepared for every variable the mountain could throw at me. But as I stood by the window, watching the whiteout consume the driveway, I knew that the real storm was not meteorological. It was biological. The guests were scattered around the great room. Uncle Wade was teaching Cousin Ben how to play poker near the fireplace. Aunt Sarah was reading a book. A glass of red wine balanced on the arm of her chair. The mood was lazy and safe. It was the specific kind of safety that comes from knowing you are locked in against the elements with people who wish you well. Then, at 4:15, the notification chimed on my tablet. It was a different tone than a text message. It was a sharp, two-note alert that signaled a perimeter breach at the primary access point. I picked up the device. Motion detected. Main gate. I tapped the screen to pull up the live feed. The camera, mounted high on the stone pillar of the gate, struggled for a moment against the driving snow before the autofocus locked onto the source of the disturbance. It was a black Range Rover. I recognized it immediately. It belonged to Miles, my sister's husband. It was a vehicle bought for status, not utility, and its low-profile tires were clearly struggling for traction on the icy incline leading up to the gate. They had arrived. I felt a rush of adrenaline, cold and sharp. I had expected them, but seeing them was different. Seeing them parked outside the barrier I had built was a physical manifestation of the boundary I had finally drawn. I walked out of the great room, moving quietly so I would not disturb the card game. I went into the security office, a small, windowless room behind the kitchen where the main server rack lived. I closed the door and locked it. I sat down in front of the bank of monitors. The image on the main screen was high definition. I could see the condensation on the Range Rover's windows. I could see the trunk popping open. Frank got out first. He was wearing a camel hair coat that was ruined the moment he stepped into the slush. He looked angry. He looked like a man who had spent 2 hours driving on treacherous roads, fueled by the belief that his arrival would command immediate obedience. He marched up to the keypad and pressed the intercom button. He didn't press it once. He held it down. Inside the security room, a buzzing sound filled the air. I pressed the talk button on the console. "The gate is locked," I said. My voice was calm, amplified by the speaker on the stone pillar outside. "Please step away from the keypad." On the screen, Frank jumped slightly. He looked up at the camera, squinting against the snow. "Isla," he shouted. The wind tore at his voice, but the directional microphone picked it up clearly. "Isla, open this damn gate. It is freezing out here." By now, the other doors of the car had opened. Diane stepped out, wrapped in a fur coat that looked ridiculous in the blizzard. Then Tessa emerged, looking pale and motion-sick. Finally, Miles got out from the driver's side, looking frantic, checking his phone as if hoping for a signal that didn't exist. And then I saw the detail that turned my stomach. Miles walked to the back of the car and began pulling out suitcases. 1, 2, 3 large, hard-shell Louis Vuitton cases. They hadn't come to talk. They hadn't come for dinner. They had come to move in. They assumed that once they arrived, the sheer force of their presence would compel me to fold. They assumed I would scramble to make up a guest room, to set extra places at the table, to revert to the obedient daughter who just wanted to be included. I leaned into the microphone. "You are not on the guest list," I said. Frank slammed his hand against the metal gate. "Guest list? We are your parents. Open this gate right now. Young lady, do you have any idea how dangerous the roads are?" "I do," I said. "That is why I sent professional drivers to pick up the invited guests. You drove yourselves?" "Isla, please." Diane's voice cut in. She pushed Frank aside and looked up at the camera. Tears already streaming down her face. It was a performance I had seen 1,000 times. It was the victim mother routine, designed to make me feel like a monster for having boundaries. "Isla, baby, it is Christmas Eve. We just want to be together. We made a mistake. We came to make it right. We can't spend Christmas apart. It isn't right." I watched her face on the high-resolution monitor. I zoomed in. I could see the mascara running. It looked convincing. If I hadn't received that call from the bank 3 hours ago, I might have even wavered. I might have thought that maybe, just maybe, they actually missed me. But the fraud alert was still burning in my mind. "If you came to make it right," I said, my voice echoing through the snowy valley, "then why did someone apply for a loan in my name 4 hours ago?" On the screen, the reaction was instantaneous. Diane stopped crying. Her mouth snapped shut. Frank stiffened, his hand falling away from the gate. Tessa, who had been shivering by the car, looked up sharply, her eyes widening. They froze. The tableau was perfect. The wind whipped around them, but they were paralyzed by the sudden exposure of their crime. "I don't know what you are talking about." Frank tried to bluster, but his voice lacked its usual thunder. "We are here to celebrate. $50,000, I cut him off. "Submitted from the desktop in your study, flagged by the bank as identity theft. I have the IP logs. Dad, I know you did it." Miles stepped forward. He pushed past Diane and grabbed the bars of the gate. He looked desperate. His hair was wet with snow, plastered to his forehead, and his eyes were wild. "Isla, listen to me," Miles shouted. "It is a misunderstanding. We didn't steal anything. We just needed a bridge. Look, open the gate. We need to talk. We need to figure this out before the bank processes the report. It is a mess, Isla, a total mess." "Miles," Frank barked, trying to silence him, but Miles ignored him. "We are leveraged up to our eyeballs. The deal fell through. If we don't show liquidity by Tuesday, They call the note on the house. We just needed a signature. We were going to pay you back." I sat back in my chair. There it was. They weren't here for reconciliation. They weren't here because they saw my Instagram and felt a pang of longing for their daughter. They were here because the loan application had been denied. They were here because I was their last remaining asset. They had driven 2 hours through a blizzard not to hug me, but to coerce me into signing a document that would save them from their own greed. I looked at the luggage again. They didn't plan to leave. They planned to stay here, in my house, eat my food, drink my wine, and bully me until I bailed them out. "So that is it," I said. "You didn't come for Christmas. You came for a bailout." "We are family," Miles screamed, shaking the gate. "You have millions. You are sitting in a fortress while we are about to lose everything. How can you be so selfish?" I reached for the microphone button, but then I hesitated. I saw movement on the edge of the monitor. Inside the lodge, the great room had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the driveway. The lights inside were bright, turning the windows into a stage for anyone standing outside, but allowing those inside to see out into the illuminated snow. Aunt Sarah was standing at the window. Uncle Wade was beside her. The Davises were there too. They were holding their drinks, looking down the hill at the scene playing out at the gate. They couldn't hear the words, but they could see the aggression. They could see Miles shaking the bars. They could see Frank screaming. They could see the luggage. I didn't need to explain anything to the guests. The visual was enough. My parents were not acting like guests. They were acting like creditors coming to collect. "Isla," Diane wailed again, switching tactics back to pity. "We are freezing. You can't leave your mother out in the snow. We have nowhere else to go." I pressed the button one last time. "You have a home in Oak Creek," I said. "I suggest you go back there while you still have it. The roads are only going to get worse." "You open this gate," Frank roared, his face turning purple. "I command you. I am your father." "You are a liability," I said, "and my security protocol does not allow liabilities inside the perimeter." "Isla." "Goodbye, Frank," I said. "The police report has already been filed. I wouldn't speed on the way home if I were you." I cut the audio feed. I didn't turn off the camera. I watched. I saw Frank kick the gate. I saw Miles slump against the hood of the car, burying his face in his hands. I saw Diane turn on Tessa, shouting something I couldn't hear, waving her hands in the air. And then I looked at Tessa, my sister, the golden child, the one who had everything I was supposed to want. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't crying. She was standing perfectly still in the snow, wearing a coat that wasn't warm enough, staring up at the camera lens. Her face was white, drained of all color. For the first time in her life, the illusion had cracked completely. She looked at the luggage her husband had packed, the luggage that signaled their assumption that my boundaries meant nothing. She looked at our parents, who were currently blaming each other in the driveway. She looked at the camera, and I saw the realization hit her like a physical blow. They hadn't brought her along because they wanted her company. They had brought her as leverage. They brought her because they thought seeing her face would soften me. She was just another tool in their kit, just like the deadbeat text, just like the guilt trips. They didn't love her any more than they loved me. They just found her more useful, until now that she was broke and married to a failure. She was just as desperate as they were. Tessa stared into the lens, and for a second, I felt a phantom connection. She looked terrified. She looked like a child who had just realized the adults were not in charge. She didn't wave. She didn't beg. She just turned around, walked to the back door of the Range Rover, and got inside. She slammed the door. Miles followed her a moment later, defeated. Frank and Diane stood there for another minute, screaming at the silent intercom, their breath pluming in the air like exhaust. Finally, the cold won. Frank stormed back to the car. Diane followed, clutching her furs. The Range Rover reversed. It skidded slightly on the ice, fishtailing, before the tires caught traction. They turned around in the narrow clearing and began the slow, humiliating descent back down the mountain. I watched them go until the taillights disappeared around the bend. Swallowed by the white storm, the gate stood firm. The black steel bars were cold and indifferent. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the massive release of adrenaline. I had done it. I had looked them in the eye, or as close as technology allowed, and I had said no. I unlocked the door to the security room and stepped out. The hallway was quiet. I walked back toward the great room. Aunt Sarah was still standing by the window. She turned as I entered. Her face was serious, but her eyes were kind. She didn't ask who it was. She knew. "Are they gone?" she asked softly. "Yes," I said. "They are gone." "Good," Uncle Wade said from his chair. He didn't look up from his cards, but his voice was like granite. "Deal the next hand. Ben." I looked around the room. Nobody was judging me. Nobody was horrified that I had turned my family away on Christmas Eve. They had seen the car. They had seen the anger. They understood that you don't let wolves into the sheepfold just because they are wearing wool coats. I walked over to the fire and held my hands out to the warmth. The cold from the security room seemed to evaporate. "Who wants hot chocolate?" I asked. "I do," Mrs. Davis said, smiling. "With extra marshmallows." "Coming right up," I said. Outside, the snow covered the tire tracks of the Range Rover within minutes, wiping the slate clean, leaving the lodge isolated, protected, and finally, truly peaceful. The silence of the lodge was short-lived. 20 minutes after the taillights of the Range Rover had vanished into the white void. The radio on my belt crackled. It was Elias, the head of my security detail. "Ms. Green?" His voice was static-laced but calm. "They didn't make it to the county road. The vehicle lost traction on the switchback. They are in the ditch. No injuries, but the car is dead and the storm is escalating. Visibility is 0. I stood by the fire, the warmth of the wood stove doing little to settle the cold knot in my stomach. I had a choice. I could leave them there, letting the sheriff's department handle a retrieval that might take 3 hours, or I could bring them back. If I left them, I was the monster they always claimed I was. If I brought them back, I was opening the gate I had just sealed. But then I looked at Uncle Wade. He was shuffling a deck of cards, his eyes hard and knowing. He tapped the folder that sat on the table next to his whiskey, a folder containing the printouts of the chat logs, the IP traces, and the bank alerts we had compiled in the office. "Bring them up," I said into the radio. "But they don't go to the guest wing. Bring them to the dining room." I turned to the room. The conversation had stopped. Aunt Sarah, the Davises, and the cousins were looking at me. They knew. "They are coming back," I said, my voice steady. "Not as guests, as defendants." When the heavy oak doors opened 10 minutes later, Frank, Diane, Tessa, and Miles looked less like a family and more like a defeated army. They were shivering, their expensive coats damp with snow, their faces pale from the shock of the accident. Elias and 2 other guards stood behind them, silent sentinels ensuring this wasn't a reunion, but a processing. They walked into the dining room. The long table was set for dinner. Roast beef, glazed carrots, wine shimmering in crystal glasses. The smell of rosemary and garlic filled the air, a cruel contrast to the tension that sucked the oxygen out of the room. Frank saw the guests first. He saw the neighbors he had spent years trying to impress. He saw his sister, Sarah, who refused to make eye contact with him. He saw Wade. "Isla," Frank started, his voice shaking, trying to summon some shred of authority. "Thank God. The car, it just slid. We need—" "Sit down," I said. I didn't shout. I didn't point. I just gestured to the 4 empty chairs at the far end of the table, separated from the rest of us by an expanse of polished wood. It looked like an interrogation. "We are freezing," Diane complained, clutching her arms. "Can we at least get some warm towels? Maybe some tea?" "You can sit down," I repeated. And you can listen, because nobody is eating until we clear the air." They sat. Miles looked nauseous. Tessa looked at the floor. Frank looked at the guests, forcing a tight, grimacing smile. "Sarah, good to see you. Quite a storm, right? We had a little mishap." "Cut it, Frank," Wade said. His voice was like gravel in a blender. He didn't stand up. He just slid the folder across the table. It spun on the wood and stopped right in front of my father. "What is this?" Frank asked, staring at the manila envelope. I walked to the head of the table. I placed my hands on the back of my chair. I felt like a CEO presiding over a hostile takeover, not a daughter at Christmas dinner. "No speeches tonight," I said, looking directly at my parents. "No toasts, no stories about how much you sacrificed, just truth." "This is ridiculous," Frank sputtered, reaching for the folder but not opening it. "We just had a car accident. We are shaken up. This isn't the time for your games." "It is exactly the time," I said. "Because 4 hours ago, someone in this room tried to rob me." A gasp went around the table. Not from the family, but from the guests. Mrs. Davis covered her mouth. Cousin Ben stopped chewing. "Rob you?" Diane said, her eyes wide, feigning shock. "Isla, don't be dramatic. Who would rob you?" "You tell me." "Mom," I said. "Because the loan application for $50,000 was submitted from the computer in Dad's study, the one with the sticky enter key, the one logged in under his user profile." Frank's face turned a mottled shade of red. He slammed his hand on the table. "I told you on the phone. I was hacked. You are a security expert, aren't you? Fix it. Don't accuse your father of a felony in front of the neighbors." "I checked the logs, Frank," I said. "I checked the keystroke dynamics. I checked the browser history. It wasn't a hacker. It was you. You spent 40 minutes filling out that form. You looked up my old address to bypass the security question. You used my mother's maiden name as the backup verification." "That is technical mumbo-jumbo," Frank sneered, waving his hand dismissively. "You can make a computer say whatever you want. This is disrespectful. We are your elders." "Respect is earned," Wade interjected, leaning forward. "And theft is theft." Diane stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "We raised you," she screamed, her voice cracking. "We gave you everything. We paid for your braces. We paid for your piano lessons. We put a roof over your head for 18 years. And this is how you repay us? By counting pennies when we are in a crisis?" "Raising me was your legal obligation," I said cold, my voice cutting through her hysteria. "It is not a receipt. You don't get to bill me for my childhood just because you are bad with money now." "We are not bad with money," Frank yelled. "We are temporarily ill-quid." "Is that what you call it?" Aunt Sarah spoke up. It was the first time she had spoken to her brother in years. "Because last month, you told me you were buying a boat. You told me Isla was finally useful and that you were going to retire early." Frank froze. The lie he had told his sister collided with the lie he was telling me. "I never said that," he muttered. "You did," Sarah said. "You said, 'The girl finally made good. We are set.' Is that what I am to you?" I asked. "A retirement plan?" "We are a family," Frank shouted, his defense crumbling into sheer volume. "Families share. You have millions. You have this palace. And you would let your sister lose her home?" All eyes turned to Tessa. She was sitting next to Miles, her head bowed. She hadn't said a word since they entered the room. "Tessa?" I asked. "Did you know?" She looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She looked at Frank, then at me. "I knew we were in trouble," she whispered. Her voice was small, trembling. "Mom said you were going to help. She said it was arranged. She said you agreed to co-sign." "I never agreed to anything," I said. Tessa turned to Diane. "You told me she signed it. You told me the money was coming on Tuesday." "We were protecting you," Diane snapped at her. "We were handling it." By stealing her identity? Tessa screamed. Tears were streaming down her face now, ruining her perfect makeup. My God, Mom, I thought you asked her. I thought I didn't know you were committing fraud. It wasn't fraud, Miles interjected, his voice high and panicked. It was a bridge, a temporary allocation of resources. Shut up, Miles, Wade said. No, let him speak, I said, looking at my brother-in-law. What kind of trouble are you in, Miles? $50,000 doesn't cover a mortgage. It covers a margin call. Miles went pale. He looked at Frank, begging for help, but Frank was staring at the tablecloth. It was a sure thing, Miles mumbled, wiping sweat from his forehead. Crypto futures. The leverage was aggressive. The market turned. I lost the down payment for the new house. I lost the liquidity for the business. If we don't cover the spread by Tuesday, they liquidate everything. The cars, the house, my license. The room went silent. The truth was finally on the table, ugly and naked. It wasn't about family unity. It wasn't about Christmas. It was about a gambling debt disguised as an investment. And two parents who were willing to burn their daughter to save their son-in-law's reputation. So, I said, my voice quiet but echoing in the large room, you lost the money, and instead of owning it, instead of asking me like a human being, you decided to become me. You decided to take what you thought I wouldn't miss. You wouldn't have missed it. Frank shouted. You have $8 million. What is 50,000 to you? It is a rounding error. You are selfish. Isla, you hoard it like a dragon while we drown. I earned it, I said. And you spent 40 years telling me I was worthless. You don't get to harvest the crop you didn't water. I looked at Wade. He nodded. I am not pressing charges tonight, I said. Relief washed over Diane's face. She actually smiled, a terrifying, triumphant twitch of her lips. See? I knew you had a heart. I knew you wouldn't. But, I interrupted, I am freezing my credit. I have already filed the preliminary report with the Fraud Bureau, and I am sending a cease and desist letter to your attorney tomorrow morning. You filed a report? Frank stammered. But that creates a record. If the bank sees a fraud flag, then the loan is denied permanently, I said. And Miles, you will have to explain to your creditors why you can't pay. And Frank, if you ever try to use my name, my social security number, or my image for financial gain again, the next report won't be to the credit bureau. It will be to the district attorney. You are ruining us, Frank whispered. He looked smaller now. The bluster was gone. He looked like an old man caught shoplifting. No, Dad, I said. I am just letting you ruin yourselves without dragging me down with you. I picked up my wine glass. I looked at the guests, my real family. This dinner is for people who were invited, I said. The storm is bad, so I won't put you back in that car. You can sleep in the staff quarters above the garage. There is heat. There are beds. It is more than you gave me when I asked for help 5 years ago. The garage? Diane gasped. Isla, we are your parents. And that is the only reason you are not sleeping in the snow, I said. I turned to Elias. Escort them to the quarters. Lock the door from the outside. They leave at first light. Yes, ma'am, Elias said, stepping forward. Frank opened his mouth to scream, to rage, to demand his rights, but he looked around the room. He saw Wade staring him down. He saw the neighbors looking at him with pity and disgust. He saw Tessa weeping into her hands. He closed his mouth. For the first time in my life, Frank Green had absolutely nothing to say. He stood up, his shoulders slumped, and walked toward the door. Diane followed, sobbing quietly. Miles helped Tessa up, but she pulled her arm away from him, walking out alone. The door closed behind them. The silence that followed was heavy, like the air after a thunderstorm. Well, Wade said, picking up his fork, the roast beef is getting cold. I sat down. My hands were shaking. Just a little. But as I looked around the table, at the faces of the people who actually loved me, the shaking stopped. "Pass the potatoes, please," I said, and just like that, the courtroom was adjourned. The dinner plates had been cleared, but the heaviness in the room remained. The guests, my real family, the ones chosen by loyalty rather than blood, moved to the living room. Speaking in hushed tones, they were trying to digest not just the roast beef, but the spectacle of betrayal they had just witnessed. I stood by the window, looking out at the darkness. The snow was still falling, a relentless curtain of white barring the driveway and the garage where my parents and sister were currently locked in. I felt a strange vibration in my pocket. It was my phone. I pulled it out. A text message. "Isla, please, I need to talk to you. Just me. I am not with them. I am in the bathroom in the garage. Please." It was Tessa. I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered over the delete button. Logic told me it was a trap. Logic told me she was sent by Frank to play the good cop, to weep and plead until I cracked and signed a check to make the ugliness go away. That was the pattern. Frank broke things. Tessa cried over the pieces until I fixed them. But something about the wording gave me pause. "I am not with them." I turned to Elias, who was standing by the back door, sipping a cup of coffee. "Bring my sister up," I said. "Just her. If Frank or Diane try to follow." "Lock the door again." Elias nodded and spoke into his radio. 5 minutes later, the back door opened. Tessa stepped into the mudroom. She looked wrecked. Her mascara was gone, scrubbed away to reveal red, puffy eyes. Her expensive coat was damp. She wasn't wearing her shoes. She was in stocking feet, shivering. "Come in," I said, gesturing to the small library off the main hallway. "We can talk in there." She followed me. I closed the door, shutting out the murmurs of the guests. The library was quiet, smelling of old paper and cedar. Tessa sat on the edge of a leather armchair, wrapping her arms around herself. I didn't offer her a drink. I didn't offer her a blanket. I leaned against the heavy oak desk and waited. "I didn't know about the loan application until we were in the car," Tessa said. Her voice was brittle, like dry leaves. "I swear to you, Isla, I knew we were broke. I knew Miles was in deep, but I didn't know Dad used your name until he started bragging about how he fixed it on the drive up here." "Does it matter?" I asked. "You were still coming here to ambush me. You were still coming to use me." "I had no choice," she whispered. "We always have a choice." "Tessa," I said, "I chose to leave. I chose to starve in a cold apartment rather than play their game. You chose to stay. You chose the comfort." Tessa looked up at me then. There was a flash of something in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. It wasn't sadness. It was anger. "Comfort?" She let out a sharp, jagged laugh. "You think my life was comfortable? You think being the golden child was a prize? You got to leave, Isla. You got to be invisible. You could make mistakes in the dark. I was the trophy. I was the retirement plan. Every grade, every boyfriend, every outfit. It was curated. If I gained 2 pounds, Mom wouldn't speak to me for a week. If I didn't date the right guy, Dad would lecture me until 3 a.m. about family legacy." She took a shaky breath. "I was jealous of you," she admitted. "I hated you, not because you were difficult, but because you were free. You were the disappointment, so they let you go. I was the investment, so they kept me in a cage." I looked at her. I saw the lines of stress around her mouth that makeup usually hid. I saw a woman who had been hollowed out and filled with other people's expectations. "That is a sad story," I said, my voice neutral. "But it doesn't change the fact that you are here, tonight, asking for something. So let me ask you a question, and I want the absolute truth. Are you sorry for what they did to me? Or are you just scared because the money is gone?" Tessa flinched. She looked down at her hands. She twisted her wedding ring, a ring I now knew was likely unpaid for. "I am scared," she said softly. "I am terrified. Miles is going to go to jail if he doesn't pay these people. We are going to lose the house. I have never worked a real job in my life because Dad told me my job was to marry well. I don't know how to survive. Isla. At least that is honest, I said. But I'm also sorry, she added. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. Her hands were shaking so hard she almost dropped it. I am sorry I let them turn me against you, and I want you to see this, because if I am going down, I want you to know exactly who you are dealing with. She unlocked the phone and opened a message thread. She held it out to me. It was a text from Frank to Tessa, sent yesterday afternoon. Don't worry about Isla. We will go up there. We will make her pay, and if she refuses to help the family, we go public. I have already talked to a guy at the Chronicle. We will paint her as the heartless tech billionaire who lets her elderly parents starve. We will ruin her reputation in the industry. She will pay up to keep us quiet. Just get in the car and look sad. I read the text twice. The coldness in my chest turned into ice. This wasn't just greed. This was extortion. This was my father, the man whose DNA I shared, planning a calculated PR assault to destroy my livelihood if I didn't submit to his robbery. He wasn't just a deadbeat. He was an enemy combatant. He told me to delete it, Tessa said. But I saved it, because when I read that I realized he would do the same thing to me one day. If I stopped being useful, he would destroy me too. I handed the phone back to her. Why are you showing me this now? I asked. Because I am tired, Tessa said. She looked up, and for the first time, she looked like my sister, not my rival. I am tired of performing. I am tired of lying. I don't want to be on their team anymore. Before I could answer, the door to the library burst open. It wasn't Elias. It was Frank. He had pushed past the guard in the distraction. Or perhaps Elias had hesitated to tackle an old man. Diane was right behind him, her face twisted in a mask of indignation. There you are, Frank shouted, spotting Tessa. What are you doing in here? We are leaving. If your sister wants to treat us like dogs, we will sleep in the car. Come on! He grabbed Tessa's arm. His grip was tight, possessive. Tessa didn't move. She pulled her arm back. I am not going with you, she said. Frank froze. The guests in the living room had gone silent. Wade appeared in the doorway of the library, his face dark, sensing the escalation. Excuse me? Frank hissed. You are my daughter. You are coming with us. We are going to fix this mess. We are going to figure out how to handle Miles's debt without her help. He shot a venomous look at me. Since she has decided to be a selfish, ungrateful traitor. He looked around, realizing he had an audience. He straightened his coat, shifting into his public persona, the aggrieved patriarch. You see this? He addressed Wade and Aunt Sarah, gesturing at me. She sits here in her castle, drinking wine, while her parents freeze in a garage. She has millions, and she won't lift a finger to save her sister from ruin. She is heartless. She has always been heartless. I opened my mouth to speak, to defend myself, to lay out the facts, but I didn't have to. Stop it, Tessa said. It wasn't a whisper, it was a command. Frank looked down at her, stunned. What did you say? Tessa stood up. She was trembling, but she stood tall. She walked over to me and stood by my side. Stop lying, Dad, Tessa said. She isn't heartless. She is protecting herself. From you. Tessa, Diane shrieked. How dare you? We are doing this for you. We are doing this to save your house. You aren't doing it for me, Tessa said, her voice rising, gaining strength. You are doing it because you are broke too. I saw the foreclosure notices in the glove box. Dad, I saw them. The room gasped. Frank turned pale. And you didn't just ask her for help, Tessa continued, her eyes locking onto Frank's. You used her name, you committed a crime, and you planned to blackmail her if she said no. That is a lie, Frank shouted. She is brainwashing you. I have the texts, Dad, Tessa said calmly. She held up her phone. I have the text where you said you would ruin her reputation. I have the proof. Frank lunged for the phone. Wade stepped in between them, his broad chest blocking Frank's path. "I wouldn't do that, Frank," Wade rumbled. Frank stumbled back. He looked at Tessa, his eyes wide with betrayal. But it wasn't the betrayal of a father losing a daughter's love. It was the betrayal of a general losing his best soldier. Then, Diane stepped forward. Her face, usually so composed, so full of fake sweetness, contorted into something ugly. "You stupid girl," she spat at Tessa. The silence that followed that insult was deafening. "We gave you everything," Diane hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "We made you. We fixed your teeth. We bought your clothes. We found you a husband, and this is how you thank us? By siding with her? The difficult one? The mistake?" Tessa flinched as if she had been slapped, but in that moment, the truth was laid bare for everyone to see. There was no love in that house. There was only utility, as long as Tessa was the beautiful, obedient doll. She was loved. The moment she spoke the truth, she was the enemy. "Thank you," Tessa said, tears streaming down her face again. But this time, they were tears of release. "Thank you for finally saying it." She turned to me. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for a room. She just looked at me with a profound, exhausted apology. "I am sorry, Isla," she said. "I should have stood up for you 10 years ago." I looked at my sister. I saw the wreckage of the person she was supposed to be, and the faint glimmer of the person she could become. "I accept your apology," I said. I turned to Frank and Diane. They stood there, exposed, their power stripped away by the very child they thought they owned. "Get out," I said. "Elias will drive you to the nearest motel. He will pay for one night. After that, you are on your own." "You can't do this," Frank whispered. He looked old. He looked defeated. "I just did," I said. Frank and Diane turned and walked out. They didn't look back. They didn't look at Tessa. They walked into the snow, leaving their golden child behind because she had ceased to glitter. When the front door closed, the tension in the room broke. Aunt Sarah came forward and put a hand on Tessa's shoulder. I waited until Tessa had stopped crying. Then I spoke. "Tessa," I said. She looked up, wiping her eyes. "I know. I have to go too. I will call a cab." "No," I said. "I am not giving you $50,000. I am not paying Miles's gambling debts. I am not saving your house." Tessa nodded. "I know. I deserve that. But," I continued, "if you are ready to leave them, really leave them, I will help you start over." "What do you mean?" "I will pay for a lawyer to separate your finances from Miles and Dad," I said. "I will pay for an apartment for 6 months, a modest one, just for you. And I will pay for therapy, the best therapist in the state. You need to deprogram yourself." Tessa stared at me. "Why? After everything I did?" "Because you told the truth," I said, "and because you are the only person in this family who might still be savable. But there are conditions," I added, my voice hardening. "You sign a document stating you will never share my financial information with them again. You cut ties with their schemes. If you talk to them, it is social only, no money, no deals. If you break the contract, the support stops that same day." Tessa took a deep breath. She looked at the door where our parents had exited. Then she looked at the phone in her hand, the evidence of their cruelty. "I accept," she said. "I will sign whatever you want." I nodded. Wade walked over to me. He leaned in close, his voice a low rumble. "Isla," he said. "My lawyer is in the guest room. He says with that text message and the IP logs, we have enough for criminal conspiracy and attempted grand larceny. If you want, we can press charges tonight. We can have the sheriff pick them up at the motel." I looked at the Christmas tree in the corner. It was glowing softly, indifferent to the human wreckage around it. I thought about Frank in the motel room, realizing his control was gone. I thought about the fear that must be eating him alive. The police could wait. The jail cell was real. But the prison of their own failure was far worse, and they were already in it. "Not tonight," I said, watching the snow fall against the glass. "But soon." The sun that rose on the morning of the 25th of December was brilliant and blinding. The storm had broken in the night, leaving the world scoured clean. The sky was a hard, polished blue, and the snow piled against the windows of the lodge glittered like diamond dust. It was the kind of morning that usually belongs on a postcard, the kind that promises redemption and new beginnings. But I was not looking for redemption. I was looking for closure. I sat in my office with the door closed. The rest of the house was slowly waking up. I could hear the faint clatter of pans in the kitchen where Chef Marcus was preparing breakfast, and the muffled laughter of Cousin Ben's children running down the hallway. I was not opening presents. I was sitting in front of my laptop, staring at a government website. Identity theft affidavit. Submission finalized. I moved the mouse and clicked the button labeled Confirm. There was no confetti, there was no dramatic sound effect, just a small, spinning circle that lasted for 3 seconds, followed by a green check mark and a reference number. That was it. That was the sound of a guillotine blade dropping in the digital age. I had filed the police report. I had formally alerted the credit bureaus. I had cemented the narrative that Frank Green had committed a crime. I wasn't doing it to be cruel. I wasn't doing it to watch him suffer in a cell, though that was a possibility he now had to live with. I was doing it because for 30 years, my parents had operated on the assumption that family was a shield that protected them from the consequences of their actions. They believed that shared DNA was a get-out-of-jail-free card. I had just burned that card. I closed the laptop. The fan whirred into silence. I walked to the window. From this vantage point, I could see the winding road that led down the mountain. It had been plowed early this morning by my private contractor. The asphalt was black and wet, cutting through the white landscape like a scar. I watched as a yellow taxicab, looking small and insignificant against the vastness of the pines, made its way down the switchbacks. That would be Tessa. She was leaving. She hadn't asked to say goodbye. She hadn't asked for a check. She had simply packed her bag, called a car, and left to face the wreckage of her marriage and her finances. It was the most dignified thing she had done in her entire life. An hour later, I saw a second car leave the perimeter. It was Elias's security vehicle, driving Frank and Diane away from the motel where they had spent the night. They were heading back to their suburban home, back to the foreclosure notices in the glove box, back to a life that was rapidly shrinking. They were leaving in silence. There was no more screaming at the gate. There was no more demands for respect. They had played their final hand, the "We are your parents" card, and I had trumped it with the "I am the victim" card. They were gone. I picked up my phone. I had one last piece of administrative business to attend to. I opened my email client. I composed a new message. The recipients were Frank, Diane, and Miles. Subject: Terms of engagement. I didn't write a salutation. I didn't write, "Dear Mom and Dad." I wrote a list. 1. You are permanently banned from this property. If you attempt to enter, you will be trespassed by the sheriff. 2. Any further attempts to access my credit, my accounts, or use my identity for financial leverage will result in immediate prosecution to the fullest extent of the law. 3. I will not be paying Miles's gambling debts. I will not be paying your mortgage. Do not ask again. 4. If you attempt to slander me in the press, as you threatened to do in your text to Tessa, I will release the police report regarding the identity theft to the same journalists. Mutual destruction is a game you cannot afford to play. 5. If you want a relationship with me in the future, it begins with a written apology, not for the money. For the years you spent making me feel small so you could feel big. I read it over. It was cold. It was legalistic. It was exactly what they needed. I hit send. Then I walked out of the office and locked the door. When I entered the dining room, the smell of cinnamon rolls and bacon filled the air. The mood was light. Nobody stopped talking when I walked in. Nobody looked at me with pity. Aunt Sarah waved a fork at me. "Isla, come here," she said. "Sit next to me. I have to tell you something." I sat down. "What is it?" I was talking to Wade last night, she said, buttering a roll. About this lodge, about how you found it, and I realized something. She looked around the room, at the heavy timber beams and the stone fireplace. This place, she said. It belonged to Clara, didn't it? Great Aunt Clara. I paused, my coffee cup halfway to my mouth. I smiled. Yes, it did. I knew it! Sarah slapped the table delightedly. I recognized the stained glass in the foyer. Oh, Frank hated this place. He hated Clara, too. Who was Clara? Cousin Ben asked, leaning in. She was the black sheep of the previous generation, Wade rumbled from the other end of the table. She was an artist, never married, traveled the world. Frank and Diane called her crazy. They wouldn't let her come to Thanksgiving because she talked about politics and drank whiskey. She wasn't crazy, I said softly. She was lonely. I looked at the fire. When I was 16, after the robot incident, I felt like I didn't belong anywhere. I told them. So I started writing to her. I found her address in an old address book. We became pen pals. She was the one who told me that being different wasn't a defect. It was a strategy. We wrote to each other for 10 years. She never met me in person, but she knew me better than my own mother. And when she died, Wade said, she left the property to the trust, didn't she? She did, I nodded. But she put a clause in her will. She said that if the property was ever sold, Isla Green was to be given the first right of refusal, and the price was to be fixed at the assessed value from 10 years ago. She saved this place for me. She knew I would need a fortress one day. Aunt Sarah wiped her eye. Frank never knew, did he? No, I said. He never asked about Clara. He just waited for her to die so he could see if he got any money. When he didn't, he forgot she existed. That is the twist, Wade said, shaking his head. He was standing at the gate of a house that was practically bequeathed to you by the very relative he despised. Poetic justice doesn't get much better than that. It was true. The lodge wasn't just a purchase. It was a legacy. It was a gift from one deadbeat to another. Around noon, my phone buzzed again. I checked it, expecting a rage-filled reply to my email from Frank, but it was from Tessa. There was no text, just 2 images. The first was a screenshot of a bank confirmation. Account opened. Primary holder, Tessa Green. Balance, $500. The second was a photo of a document. It was a retainer agreement for a divorce attorney, signed and dated that morning. I stared at the screen. She hadn't gone home to Miles. She hadn't gone to Frank. She had taken the $500 she likely had hidden away and used it to start a life that belonged only to her. I didn't reply immediately. The old Ela would have sent a cheerleading message. Great job. I am so proud. But I wasn't that person anymore. I knew that praise was cheap. I knew that the hard work was just starting for her. She would have months of pain ahead. She would have to learn how to pay bills, how to be alone, how to define herself without an audience. I saved the images to a secure folder. I didn't reply. I would reply in a month, if she was still standing. I would reply when she proved that this wasn't just a momentary rebellion, but a permanent revolution. I believed in evidence, not intent, but for the first time, I hoped the evidence would be good. That evening, the final dinner of the holiday was a casual affair. We ate leftovers. We drank the good wine. The storm was a memory, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt holy. Aunt Sarah had brought a box of old photos. She spread them out on the coffee table. Look at this one, she laughed, pointing to a faded Polaroid. I looked. It was me. Age 8. I was wearing oversized overalls, my hair a mess of tangles. I was holding a screwdriver in one hand and a disassembled toaster in the other. I wasn't smiling for the camera. I was looking down at the toaster with intense, furrowed concentration. In the background of the photo, blurry and out of focus, was Tessa, wearing a tiara, posing for someone else. You look so serious, Mrs. Davis said, smiling. I was trying to figure out how the heating element worked, I said. I wanted to see if I could make it hotter. You always were trying to take things apart, Wade said. He picked up the photo and looked at it closely. You know, Frank used to complain about that. He used to say, "Why can't she just play with dolls? Why does she have to break everything?" Wade set the photo down. He looked at me across the table. His eyes were dark and kind, the eyes of a man who had seen enough of the world to know what mattered. "They called you a deadbeat. Isla," Wade said, his voice filling the room. "Not because you didn't have money, but because you wouldn't beat your life into their shape. You were a square peg, and they spent 20 years trying to hammer you into a round hole. And when you broke the hammer, they blamed you for being too hard." I felt a lump form in my throat. It wasn't sadness. It was the feeling of being seen. "I didn't want to break the hammer," I whispered. "I just wanted to build something else." "And you did," Wade said, gesturing to the room, to the people, to the peace. "You built this." I looked around. I saw the firelight reflecting in the glass. I saw the faces of the people who had chosen to be here. I saw the absence of the people who had tried to destroy me. For years, I had thought of Christmas as a performance I had to qualify for. I thought I had to earn my seat at the table by being prettier, richer, or more obedient. I thought family was a club you could be expelled from. But sitting there, listening to the wind outside and the laughter inside, I realized the truth. Christmas doesn't need permission to exist. Family isn't a hierarchy. It is a resonance. You don't beg for it. You find the people who hum at the same frequency as you, and you build a wall to keep out the noise. I stood up. "Where are you going?" Aunt Sarah asked. "Just locking up," I said. I walked to the front door. I opened it for a moment. The air was frigid, biting and clean. I looked down the driveway one last time. The tracks of the Range Rover were gone, filled in by the drift. The tracks of the taxi were fading. There was nobody coming up the hill. There was nobody waiting to judge me. I closed the heavy oak door. I threw the deadbolt. Click. Then I took my phone out of my pocket. I held down the power button. Slide to power off. I slid my thumb across the screen. The light vanished. I stood in the hallway for a moment, holding the black rectangle of glass and metal. It was just an object now. It couldn't hurt me. It couldn't deliver insults. It couldn't demand money. I walked back into the living room. "Who wants to play cards?" I asked. "I am in," Wade said, shuffling the deck. "But I am warning you, kid. I am not going easy on you just because it is Christmas." "Good," I said, sitting down and smiling. A real smile. One that reached my eyes and settled in my chest. I wouldn't have it any other way. The greatest gift I gave myself that year wasn't the lodge. It wasn't the millions of dollars. It wasn't even the victory over my father. The gift was the consequences. I had let them fall where they may. And in the space they left behind, I had finally found myself. Thank you so much for listening to the story of Isla Green and her long road to justice. I hope it brought you a sense of satisfaction to see boundaries finally being enforced. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a snowy cabin, a busy city, or somewhere warm? Please leave a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts on Isla's decision. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button, and press the hype button to help this story reach more people who need to know that it is okay to choose yourself. Stay safe and stay strong.